The galactic archives would later record this moment with all the gravitas of a diplomatic incident, but in reality, it began with a bureaucratic misunderstanding and a creature that looked less like a sacred anything and more like what would happen if you crossbred a rhinoceros with a chandelier. The Zerran Confederation had spent precisely 3,742 standard cycles protecting their most revered creature, the Luminescent Guardian of the Crystalline Peaks. Generations of Zerran priests had maintained elaborate rituals, constructed impossible temples, and developed an entire theological framework around a beast they believed maintained the cosmic balance of their entire civilization. Their holy texts described the creature in terms that would make a poet weep and a biologist laugh hysterically. A being of pure energy and sacred intention, the primary scripture read, whose very breath maintains the delicate harmony between matter and spirit. Zerran scholars had spent millennia interpreting these sacred texts, creating intricate mathematical models and developing complex spiritual practices, all centered around this mythical entity. What they actually had was a large, somewhat confused creature with iridescent skin that occasionally glowed when it was mildly irritated or needed to use the bathroom. The creature, which the Zerrans called the transcendent luminary of eternal wisdom, spent most of its time doing what any reasonably intelligent being might do when left alone in a massive crystal temple: napping, occasionally eating the local flora, and looking mildly perplexed by its own existence. The Zerran High Council would gather in their most ornate chambers, dressed in robes so elaborate they could double a small spacecraft, and discuss the creature's cosmic significance. They would stroke their multi-tentacled facial appendages and speak in hushed, reverent tones about the beast's role in maintaining universal equilibrium. In reality, the creature was about as interested in maintaining universal equilibrium as a house cat is interested in quantum physics. When the first interstellar conflict approached, a massive invasion force from the aggressive Krell Imperium, the Zerran military leadership was certain their sacred beast would rise up and obliterate the incoming threat with millennia of accumulated cosmic power. They had entire religious texts detailing how the creature would transform into a being of pure energy, unleashing destruction that would make supernovas look like birthday candles. What they didn't anticipate was that the universe has a sense of humor, and that humor was about to arrive in the form of a human exploration vessel captained by someone who would look at their sacred, cosmic, absolutely not to be trifled with beast and see something entirely different. The stage was set. The sacred creature waited, the Zerran civilization held its collective breath, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a human was about to make first contact in a way no one could possibly predict. Little did the Zerrans know that their millennia of reverence, their complex theological frameworks, and their entire civilization's future would soon be in the hands of someone who was more likely to name a cosmic guardian Fluffy than bow before it. Let's get one thing straight. Captain Wyatt Rodriguez was not your typical space explorer. He was the kind of guy who saw diplomatic protocols as suggestions, regulations as mild inconveniences, and impossible situations as personal challenges. His current assignment, a routine deep space reconnaissance mission along the outer rim, was about as exciting as watching paint dry in zero gravity. The USS Maverick wasn't exactly a state-of-the-art exploration vessel. It was more like the space equivalent of a beat-up pickup truck that had seen better decades, held together by a combination of advanced engineering, duct tape, and Rodriguez's questionable maintenance skills. "Jenkins," he called to his AI assistant, "run another system diagnostic. I'm pretty sure that weird vibration isn't normal." The ship's holographic interface flickered to life, looking perpetually unimpressed. "Captain, that weird vibration is the same one I've reported 17 times in the past month. It's a harmonic resonance in the tertiary power coupling. We could fix it if you'd authorize the replacement part." Rodriguez leaned back in his captain's chair, which had more patches than original upholstery. "Where's the fun in that? Improvisation builds character." His crew had long since learned that improvisation in Wyatt Rodriguez speak meant, "We're going to do something monumentally stupid that might get us killed, but will definitely make for an excellent story later." A veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts and holder of the unofficial record for most diplomatic incidents resolved by sheer audacity, Rodriguez wasn't just a captain. He was a walking violation of standard operating procedures. His personnel file was a masterpiece of bureaucratic frustration. Commendations were always accompanied by equally lengthy reports of procedural breaches. He'd once negotiated a peace treaty with the notoriously aggressive Vorgon clans by challenging their lead negotiator to a drinking contest, which he won despite the fact that the Vorgon metabolized alcohol through their knee joints. The communication console pinged, interrupting his reminiscing. An encrypted transmission from Central Command flickered into view, marked with the highest priority designation. "Captain Rodriguez," the message began, "your current mission parameters have been altered. Intelligence suggests unusual activity in the Zerran Prime Quadrant. Your orders are to investigate and—" Rodriguez was already grinning. Investigate in military speak usually meant go poke something with a very long stick and see what happens. Jenkins materialized, looking concerned. "Captain, the last time you interpreted investigate so broadly, we ended up accidentally married to a tribal queen on Epsilon Gamma and had to negotiate our way out using only a broken translator and a bottle of questionable liquor. Best diplomatic mission ever," Rodriguez replied, adjusting his slightly askew command jacket. "Those wedding photos are still my screensaver." The ship's navigation computer calculated the route to Zerran Prime. Rodriguez noticed something odd about the star charts. The entire sector was surrounded by what looked like deliberate navigation warnings, the kind of markers civilizations use when they really don't want outsiders poking around. To Rodriguez, those warnings might as well have been a giant, glowing invitation that said, "Please investigate." "Jenkins," he announced, "plot a course directly through those restricted zones and prepare first contact protocols." The AI's holographic form actually pinched its projected nose bridge. "By first contact protocols, you mean your standard approach of talking very loudly, making wildly inappropriate jokes and hoping nobody shoots at us?" "Exactly." Rodriguez grinned. "Diplomatic subtlety is overrated." Little did Captain Wyatt Rodriguez know that his upcoming encounter would redefine not just interstellar diplomacy, but the entire concept of what a sacred beast could mean. The USS Maverick hummed to life, its patched-together systems firing up with the enthusiasm of a vehicle that had survived far more than any reasonable piece of technology should. Destination, Zerran Prime. Mission, completely unpredictable. The Zerran Crystalline Peaks were not what Rodriguez expected. Imagine a landscape that looked like someone had taken a mountain range, dipped it in glitter, and then decided to add some extra sparkle for good measure. Massive crystal formations jutted from the landscape, refracting light in ways that made Rodriguez's systems go absolutely haywire. "Jenkins," he muttered, tapping the malfunctioning display. "Are you seeing this?" The AI's holographic form flickered with what could only be described as digital confusion. "Sensors are confused, Captain. It's like the entire landscape is designed to break every known law of physics." Rodriguez's landing shuttle descended through a particularly treacherous crystal canyon. The local Zerran ground control had been less than enthusiastic about his arrival. Their last transmission had been a masterpiece of bureaucratic panic. "Unauthorized human vessel, you are entering a sacred zone. Immediate withdrawal is advised. This is your final warning." Rodriguez, of course, interpreted this as an invitation. The shuttle touched down with a grace that could generously be described as controlled falling. A small cloud of iridescent dust billowed around the landing site, sparkling like a disco ball had exploded. "Atmospheric composition," Jenkins reported, "is interesting, breathable, but with trace elements that would make most xenobiologists do a double take." Rodriguez checked his environmental suit, more out of habit than actual concern. He'd survived worse planetary introductions. There was that time on Proxima 9 where the local fauna mistook him for a mating ritual participant, but that was a story for another day. As he stepped out of the shuttle, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not just any silence, but the kind of profound quiet that suggested something was about to go spectacularly wrong. Then he saw it. The sacred beast of Zerran legend was, well, it was something. Imagine if a rhinoceros had been designed by a committee of artists who were simultaneously drunk, sleep-deprived, and experiencing a collective fever dream. Its skin shifted between colors not smoothly, but in sharp, almost pixelated transitions. Crystalline growths protruded from its body at impossible angles, giving it the appearance of a living, breathing modern art installation. The creature was currently doing what could only be described as a very dignified nap. Rodriguez did what any reasonable human would do when confronted with a millennia-old sacred beast. He walked up to it and said, "Hey, you awake?" The beast's eyes, if you could call them eyes, weren't so much organic as they were swirling pools of light that seemed to look through Rodriguez, rather than at him. "Jenkins," Rodriguez whispered, "run a full spectrum analysis on this thing." The AI's response was immediate and slightly panicked. "Captain, its biological signature is complex. It's registering multiple quantum states simultaneously. This isn't just a creature, it's basically a walking physics experiment." The beast let out a sound that was somewhere between a purr, a whale song, and what might happen if you microwave a synthesizer. Rodriguez, undeterred, reached out and, to the absolute horror of any Zerran priest who might have been watching, patted the creature on what he assumed was its head. "I'm gonna call you Fluffy," he announced. The creature blinked, or shifted, or did something that was simultaneously blinking and not blinking. Jenkins' holographic form looked apoplectic. "Captain, you cannot be serious. This is a sacred being worshipped by an entire civilization for millennia, and you're naming it Rodriguez shrugged. "Works for me." What happened next was not in any diplomatic training manual. The creature, Fluffy, seemed to recognize something in Rodriguez. Its crystalline growths shifted, realigning in patterns that might have been a greeting or might have been a complex mathematical equation. "I think," Rodriguez said slowly, "we just became friends." Little did he know this moment would change the course of an entire interstellar conflict. But for now, it was just a man, an AI, and a sacred beast that had just been christened Fluffy, sitting in the middle of a sparkling crystal landscape. Jenkins could only emit what could only be described as a digital sigh. The Zerran military attaché assigned to monitor Rodriguez looked like he was developing a permanent nervous twitch. Captain Rodriguez and Fluffy were not what anyone would call a standard military unit. Their training looked less like a strategic preparation and more like an improvisational comedy routine, with potentially apocalyptic implications. "So," Rodriguez announced to Fluffy, who was currently creating intricate light patterns by blinking, "we need to figure out how to fight the Krell invasion force." Jenkins projected a holographic battle map. The Krell were not subtle opponents. Their invasion strategy typically involved overwhelming force, massive battleships, and a complete disregard for anything resembling diplomatic nuance. They were the galactic equivalent of a bull in a china shop, if the bull was made of battleship-grade armor and the china shop was an entire planetary system. Rodriguez studied the map, occasionally reaching out to pat Fluffy, who seemed to respond by changing colors in what might have been confusion or agreement. It was hard to tell. "The Zerran military has been preparing defensive strategies for centuries," the attaché, a lanky alien named Zerric, explained, his multiple tentacles quivering with barely contained anxiety. "Our sacred texts detail—" "No," Rodriguez interrupted, "we're doing this my way." My way turned out to be a series of increasingly bizarre training exercises that would have made any standard military strategist weep. Day one involved Rodriguez teaching Fluffy what he called basic combat maneuvers. This primarily consisted of Rodriguez running around, making explosive sounds, and Fluffy attempting to mimic him. The result was a crystalline creature that occasionally glowed, shifted colors, and moved with a grace that was simultaneously elegant and completely nonsensical. "See," Rodriguez explained to a bewildered Zerric, "we're developing a communication system." "By running in circles and making explosion noises," Zerric's translator rendered his words with perfect confusion. Jenkins projected a probability matrix. "Statistically speaking, Captain, this has a 0.003% chance of being an effective combat strategy." Rodriguez grinned. So you're saying there's a chance? The Zerran Defensive Command Center was rapidly descending into controlled chaos. Their most sacred creature was being trained by a human who seemed to view military strategy as an elaborate game of cosmic improvisation. Fluffy, for its part, was an unexpectedly quick learner. When Rodriguez demonstrated dodging, the creature developed an ability to momentarily phase between dimensional states. When he showed aggressive posturing, Fluffy learned to create light displays that could potentially blind or disorient enemies. It's like, Rodriguez explained to Jenkins, we're creating a whole new kind of warfare. A warfare based on running in circles and making explosion sounds, the AI responded dryly. Precisely. Zerric watched in growing horror and fascination. The Zerran military had spent millennia preparing elaborate defensive protocols. Their sacred texts described complex ritualistic preparations for conflict. Rodriguez was preparing for war like he was planning the world's most dangerous comedy routine. By day 3, Fluffy could shift between physical states at will, create disorienting light displays, mimicked Rodriguez's increasingly ridiculous combat sounds, produce a noise that was somewhere between a whale song and a microwave malfunction. The Krell invasion force was approaching. Traditional military wisdom suggested this would be a massacre. Rodriguez had other plans. Jenkins, he announced, adjusting his slightly askew command jacket, run a full tactical simulation. The AI's projection showed multiple scenarios. In 99.7% of them, the Zerran civilization would be completely obliterated. So, Rodriguez said, scratching Fluffy behind what might have been its ear, we've got a chance. Zerric could only watch as the most sacred creature in Zerran history was being prepared for interstellar combat by a human who seemed to view military strategy as an elaborate comedy sketch. The invasion was coming, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared for what was about to happen. The Krell invasion fleet emerged from hyperjump like a swarm of angry metallic hornets. Massive battleships bristling with weaponry that could turn entire planetary surfaces into molten glass. Their communication channels broadcasted a standard threat: total surrender or total annihilation. Rodriguez looked at Fluffy. Fluffy looked back, which was saying something, considering the creature's eyes were more like swirling quantum event horizons. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked. Fluffy shifted color. "Twice." The Zerran military command was simultaneously watching and having collective nervous breakdowns. Centuries of preparation, millennia of sacred texts, and their entire defensive strategy now hinged on a human captain and a sacred beast that looked like it had been designed by a committee of drunk physicists. The first Krell strike wave approached, sleek, deadly fighter craft that could punch through planetary shields like tissue paper. Their weapons charged, targeting systems locked, absolute destruction guaranteed. What they didn't expect was Fluffy. Rodriguez's tactical approach could generously be described as completely insane. As the Krell fighters dove, Fluffy didn't just dodge, dodge was too simple a word. The creature literally phased between dimensional states, causing targeting systems to go absolutely haywire. One moment Fluffy was where the Krell fighters were shooting, the next moment it wasn't. "Jenkins," Rodriguez called. "Tactical overlay." The AI's holographic display showed the battle in real time, with Fluffy's movements looking less like standard evasive maneuvers and more like a cosmic dance performance. Quantum probability waves erupted around the creature, causing Krell fighters to collide with each other, their own weapons turning against them in impossible geometric patterns. A Krell battleship commander would later describe the encounter as fighting a disco ball having a seizure while simultaneously existing in multiple realities. Rodriguez whooped. "That's my boy." Fluffy responded by creating a light display that was simultaneously a warning, a mathematical equation, and what might have been the universe's most complex come-at-me gesture. The Zerran military attaché at Zerric watched in absolute disbelief. Their sacred creature, the transcendent luminary of eternal wisdom, was essentially playing the most dangerous game of interdimensional tag ever conceived. Krell fighters started experiencing systemic failures. Navigation computers crashed, weapons systems redirected. One fighter pilot reported his craft briefly turning into a small flock of origami cranes before exploding. "Statistically impossible," Jenkins muttered. "Welcome to our playbook," Rodriguez grinned. The battle wasn't just a confrontation, it was performance art. Chaos theory made manifest, a quantum physics lecture delivered at hyperspeed with explosion. Fluffy moved with a grace that defied explanation. When Krell missiles locked on, the creature would shift, not just in space, but in probability. The missiles would find themselves targeting their own launch platforms, or suddenly materializing inside asteroid fields. One particularly ambitious Krell battleship attempted a concentrated energy blast that could vaporize entire continents. Fluffy simply absorbed it. The energy wave transformed into a complex light show that looked like a combination of a mathematical proof and a particularly enthusiastic rave. Rodriguez's communication channel to Zerran Command crackled with disbelief. "Are you seeing this?" he shouted over the sounds of quantum mayhem. Zerrik's response was less a sentence and more a series of shocked biological sounds that his translator struggled to convert into language. The Krell invasion force, designed for total destruction, found themselves fighting an opponent that didn't just break the rules of warfare, it seemed to be rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. Hour after hour, the battle continued. Fluffy danced, missiles waltzed, entire battleships found themselves performing impossible maneuvers. And through it all, Rodriguez kept up a running commentary that was part battle report, part stand-up comedy routine. "Jenkins," he called, "remind me to write a report about this. No one is going to believe a word of it." The AI's response was a digital equivalent of an eye roll. As the last Krell ship spiraled into a dimensional rift of its own creation, Rodriguez turned to Fluffy. "Good job, buddy," he said, scratching what might have been the creature's equivalent of a head. Fluffy glowered, triumphantly. The aftermath of the battle looked less like a traditional military victory and more like a quantum physics experiment gone spectacularly wrong. Zerrik, the Zerran military attaché, found himself in the most uncomfortable debriefing of his entire diplomatic career. The Zerran High Council had assembled their most prestigious members draped in robes that cost more than entire planetary economies, and they were staring at Rodriguez like he was simultaneously the most brilliant and most terrifying creature they'd ever encountered. "So," Rodriguez began as if he were discussing a particularly interesting weekend barbecue, "your sacred beast just saved your entire civilization." Silence. Jenkins projected a holographic replay of the battle. The Krell invasion force, once considered the most unstoppable military power in 3 galactic sectors, had been utterly decimated. Not through conventional warfare, but through what could only be described as cosmic comedy. The eldest member of the High Council, a being so ancient his robes seemed to predate the concept of fabric, finally spoke. "Our sacred texts spoke of a great transformation, a moment when the transcendent luminary would reveal its true power." Rodriguez scratched Fluffy behind what might have been its ear. "Yeah, we call that Tuesday." Fluffy responded by creating a light display that was simultaneously a mathematical proof, a victory dance, and what might have been the universe's most complex "you're welcome" gesture. The diplomatic complications were extraordinary. The Zerran civilization had spent millennia believing their sacred beast was a passive guardian of cosmic balance. Rodriguez had essentially turned their most revered spiritual symbol into a quantum warfare specialist. "The creature," one council member stammered, "is not just a sacred beast. It is a weapon of unprecedented capability." "Nah," Rodriguez corrected. "He's just Fluffy. Aren't you, buddy?" Fluffy glowed in what could only be described as agreement. The Krell Imperium's response was equally complicated. Their military command was attempting to file reports that sounded more like fever dreams. Official transcripts included phrases like dimensional instability and quantum warfare beyond comprehension. One Krell battle report simply read, "What just happened?" in all capital letters. Jenkins calculated the diplomatic ramifications. "Captain," the AI reported, "we've essentially rewritten the entire galactic understanding of warfare, spiritual beliefs, and interdimensional physics." Rodriguez shrugged. Just another Tuesday. The truly remarkable thing was how casually Rodriguez had dismantled millennia of Zerran's spiritual understanding. Their sacred beast, once believed to be a passive, meditative entity, had just demonstrated warfare capabilities that made entire military academies look like kindergarten science projects. Zerric approached Rodriguez, his multiple tentacles quivering with a combination of respect and absolute terror. "What," he asked carefully, "exactly do you plan to do with Fluffy?" Rodriguez grinned. "Well, we've got some open positions on my ship. Jenkins could use a co-pilot with interdimensional capabilities." Fluffy shifted colors, twice, which, as far as anyone could tell, was its version of a job acceptance. The Zerran High Council watched in stunned silence as Rodriguez treated their most sacred cosmic entity like a slightly unusual pet that had just learned a particularly impressive trick. "Ombre question," the eldest council member asked. "How did you know the creature could do all of this?" Rodriguez's response was quintessentially human. "I didn't. I just thought it looked cool and decided to see what would happen if I asked nicely." Fluffy glowed, proudly. The diplomatic report would later describe the encounter as an unprecedented interspecies collaboration. What it wouldn't capture was the fundamental weirdness of watching a human captain treat a quantum-shifting sacred beast like a slightly oversized, occasionally glowing companion. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez turned to Fluffy. "Ready to see the universe?" The creature's response was a light show that was simultaneously a yes, a complex mathematical equation, and what might have been the universe's most elaborate wink. Jenkins could only emit what could only be described as a digital sigh. The USS Maverick lifted off, carrying a human captain, an exasperated AI, and a sacred beast that had just revolutionized understanding of warfare, spirituality, and interdimensional physics. Just another day in the universe.